Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I'd like to welcome you all to the Senate Commerce Committee hearing today, and I'd like you to join us in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. Senator Susie, would you please take the lead?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Senator Gannon has an excused absence today, so we're going to hear all the House bills, but we will not be executing them this morning, but we will go into executive session for a Senate bill. Just wanted to let you know so you can plan your day.
What is that, Senate Bill 201?
Yes. We are now going to hear House Bill 167. And the first person to come to the table is going to be Christopher. Oh, okay. Representative, thank you. Please take a seat. Good morning. How are you?
Good morning. Thank you, Madam Chairperson, and good morning to all. I'm Representative Hope Damon, Sullivan District 8, the towns of Ackworth, Langdon, Leominster, Goshen, Washington, Springfield, Sunapee, Croydon, and Claremont. I live in Croydon. This is a very simple bill by constituent request. And in fact, the other person you have listed to speak is the constituent. So if I could invite Chris to come forward, I think that would be helpful and efficient.
Of course.
Just introduce yourself and
Yeah, good morning, committee. I'm Christopher Prost. Should I just go?
well, one second. So the bill is simply to address an issue with very small nanobrewery licensing fees to make them more appropriate to the size of the enterprise for nanobreweries that are on a residential property. And as you probably have already seen in your email messaging, the State Liquor Commission does support this bill.
Sure, and I'll just read my statement. There's a few additions. It's pretty similar to the original statement for the House Committee, which I'll provide a written copy, but this just gives the bigger picture. So yeah, like I said, I'm Christopher Prost. My wife and I own Polyculture Brewing in Croydon. We're one of the smallest breweries in the state, producing less than 50 barrels of beer annually. So we started out almost 5 years ago, but we've been unable to access the license that seems like it was written for breweries like ours, the Nano Brewery license, which is RSA 178-12A. That license is intended for breweries producing less than 2,000 barrels annually. And then there's several other small breweries like ours that have faced similar difficulty in obtaining that license. The Liquor Commission has repeatedly cited public building language of the Nano Brewery law as a reason for not approving us for this license. Our brewery's in a barn that shares a wall with our house on our property. They've cited concerns about having a brewery in a residence, but federal law already prohibits breweries in dwellings, and you need to comply with federal permits, federal law to obtain a federal permit, which you also need to obtain a state license to brew. We also have commercial insurance and permits and permission from our town to operate, but instead of being licensed as a nano, we've been licensed as a beverage manufacturer, which is the same license the largest breweries in the state have. So the result is that we pay a higher licensing fee of $1,200 annually to be a beverage manufacturer, 5 times more expensive than the Nano Brewery license fee, which is currently $240. It may not seem like a huge difference in the overall scheme, but any small business owner can tell you that every dollar counts. Added up over our 4 years, it's almost $4,000 extra paid in licensing fees, which could have gone to equipment or ingredients. We also have missed out on certain opportunities that have been made available to nano breweries through legislation because legislators understandably assume that all the small breweries are nano breweries, are licensed as nano breweries, and all beverage manufacturers are like large breweries, which isn't the case. One example is a few years ago, they started to allow wine tastings for nano breweries, where a winery could come and do a tasting at your place. You could go do a tasting at theirs. But that was only applied to the nano brewery law, not the beverage manufacturer law. So yeah, the public building language, which I'm referring to, doesn't appear in the RSAs for other alcohol manufacturing in the state, including the liquor manufacturer, wine manufacturer, beverage manufacturer, brew pub license. And removing the language will put the decision for making put the decision-making for appropriate building use back on the town or municipality, allowing for more local control, and put the state law in line with federal guidelines, which I think is what the Liquor Commission's email also stated. And yeah, this is particularly important because there's several other breweries that share our situation, and most are in rural areas like ours where commercial property is limited. Now, since the initial hearing in the House Commerce and Consumer Affairs Committee, the Liquor Commission has been very accommodating to re-examine our license type to redetermine if the nano license would be appropriate. And we thank them for being open to this after previously being told there was like no way to reevaluate the license. And I'm pretty sure they're also working with some other small breweries like ours who have been affected by this language to see if they could change the license. But we think this illustrates the issue with the current language and the fact that it being open to interpretation, really makes the case that this simple administrative change is worthwhile. Also aware that another bill, Senate Bill 137, which may affect the different brewery licenses overall, is in the works. That bill proposes kind of a major overhaul of the brewery licensing landscape, and it seems like it's going to require multiple stakeholders to come together and reach a consensus on the exact language and everything that's going to be included in there. But pursuing this change now will help breweries like ours in the event that that change does not go forward or gets scaled back. So in closing, I ask you to support House Bill 167 that will make the nano brewery license available to some of the smallest breweries in our state, as well as restoring the decisions to local municipalities. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your testimony. Do the members of the committee have any questions? Seeing none, thank you. Are there any other members of the public that would like to speak to House Bill 167? Seeing none, we'll close the hearing on House Bill 167, and we will open the hearing for House Bill 460. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, you
I thought we were running behind. We started out behind, we caught up.
Yeah.
We will wait.
We have enough time?
Well, sure.
Okay. I move we go into executive session.
Second.
All those in favor of executive session, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.
I'd like to pass on Senate Bill 201.
Second.
A motion for ought to pass on 201? Yes?
Mhm.
Yes.
Okay.
We have an amendment.
And if I could speak to that, and then, forgive me, I have an amendment, which is, and I'd like to move ought to pass on amendment 0991. Second.
Okay.
And I'd like to just point out that the amendment addresses the concerns that were raised by this committee, and thank you to the committee for raising those concerns. And the amendment replaces the bill in its entirety, and it addresses really the one of the issues that I think we can address as a matter of consumer protection, and that is requiring that resellers do in fact make clear that they are reselling the tickets, that they may not be in possession of those tickets, and that they are not the venue where the performance is being held. And it also requires that there be some way that the purchaser acknowledges that the purchaser is aware of that situation. So I hope that addresses concerns by everyone.
I'd like to thank Senator Chanley for working on this. I was concerned about the underlying bill, but it has been addressed because this amendment does replace the entire bill. So given that, does anyone else want to discuss it? Okay,
Amendment first.
we'll vote on the amendment first.
Okay.
Motion,
We have it.
okay.
Yeah. All in favor?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, none?
And then
Oh, we need,
move on to pass as amended. Yep.
well, ought to pass on the bill as amended. All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
All opposed, none. We
Thank
can't
you.
put it on consent because,
Right.
but
Thank you very much.
thank you for the hard work on it. Yeah. You
Motion,
should.
motion to come out of exec?
Second.
All in favor?
That's okay. You did good.
Good. Let me see what time it is.
We have a lot of speakers.
All right.
You're good to go.
Okay, we need to come out of executive session. Do we do that? Yeah, okay. All right. We are now going to open the hearing on House Bill 467. The first, the chair will recognize, oh, I don't want to pronounce your name terrible, Lee Bodie? Where is? Oh. No, you can introduce first.
Good morning. I'm Representative Caitlin Kutab. I represent Rockingham District 17, the town of Windham. Thank you all for having me here today. This bill seeks to make new playgrounds ADA accessible. So the analysis that's in here, I do just want to point out, the analysis says in use on or after. That is incorrect. However, the bill itself is correct. It's constructed for use on or after. So I'm not trying to shut down pre-existing playgrounds. This is for playgrounds built from January 1st, 2024 forward. This bill came to be because a little girl in my town entered school for the first time and went out on the playground and was unable to move her mobility device. So you've got this three-year-old little girl who's watching her twin sister play and all the other kids play on the playground in public school and is unable to do so with her peers. Because even though the playground was built after the point where it had to be ADA accessible, the ADA accessible law is not very clear because it doesn't define the materials that need to be used, because there's different materials that need to be used in different parts of the country and with different climates. And so this bill seeks to define what materials work in our climate, and it also allows for other similar surfacing. So if there's something better that can be used, somebody can absolutely use that. This isn't a problem that's happened in one town, it's a problem that has happened in many towns, simply because the ADA accessibility requirements basically say that it needs to be accessible, and here's an ATSM standard that defines what that means. And when you go to the ATSM standard, it says you can't have to exert more force than you would pushing a 165-pound person in a wheelchair at a 7% incline. And most people don't necessarily know what that means, but when a builder first delivers the playground, let's say they're using this engineering wood fiber, which is essentially wood chips, it meets that requirement for the first week. until the chips are no longer compacted and no longer perfectly flat. And then all of a sudden you're sinking into those wood chips and you can't move around in them anymore. I'm not aware of any towns that have somebody on staff, to keep going out and raking it every few hours. So it just doesn't work. What Exeter was able to do is after theirs didn't meet the standards, they were able to rake it all perfectly flat, the engineering wood fiber, and then they put interlocking rubber mats over it so that it would be a solid surface. And that was a pretty economical solution for them. They stated that it didn't cost them an exorbitant amount of money. However, if it had been way after the point where they had just done it, they would have had to essentially replace everything in order to have done it. But because it was still relatively flat, they were able to do it pretty cheaply. And so that's where this bill originated from, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for the testimony. Are there questions or comments from the committee? I have a couple.
Sure.
So we have a federal law for this issue, and we have a state law. As I was researching this, so I'd like to see this problem fixed. It's something that should be fixed, but my question is, if we have a federal and a state law, and that isn't taking care of the problem, do you think that a law again would fix the problem, or do you think maybe the problem is that the inspectors need training to know that when they go to inspect and deal with the developer or the person doing the playground, that they can inform them that they're not in compliance with not only federal law, but the state law that already exists?
I do think it would fix it because I think the issues are the materials that are being used, and this is defining what would actually work. And I want to remind that when the playground is being delivered, it is meeting the standard for that period. So I don't think that it's a problem with the inspectors not doing a good job. I think they are doing their job. It's just that, again, once you're running around and it's not flat anymore, the wheelchairs are sinking in. It's something that becomes a problem after a week. But the law doesn't say that it needs to be, only accessible for the first week. It needs to be accessible. It needs to continue to be accessible. And so I think that this would help with that because this is defining what would work. So I think there is a law, but it's very ambiguous, and it's up to people to figure out what actually works. And it takes a lot of research sometimes to figure out what works. And when you're putting together an entire playground, and this is one, piece of the playground, I think it gets difficult. But if you had the easy answer right in front of you, and if some new material comes out that works perfectly fine, this is allowing you to use that too, because it is allowing for other alternate materials. So I do think it would solve the problem.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Thank you for your testimony. Our next speaker, Boda. Thank you. Good morning and welcome.
Thank you. So if I may I'm the second speaker, Bodhi's mother, Deodane Badarai. We live in Concord. We own a house here. I'm raising 2 children here. And there are, about 1 in 4 people have a disability. There are 0 accessible playgrounds in the Concord area. The nearest one we know of is Nashua. And there are no schools that have accessible playgrounds currently. So I'm going to turn this over to Bodhi because who can speak to this better than a kid?
My name is Bodhi Badarai. I am 8 years old. I am in 3rd grade. I support this bill. I use a wheelchair. At school, I can't play on the playground with my friends because there's wood chips and wood chips are not accessible. When it is warm, I bring chalk to recess to play on the pavement, and sometimes my friends come to play too. When we have snow, I just roll around on the pavement, mostly by myself. It's kind of lonely. I love school. I have lots of friends, and I love to play. I want the playground to be accessible so I can roll on it easily, because then I can play with my friends. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You did a very good job with your testimony. Are there any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I have more detailed written.
Thank you. I believe our next speaker, the chair will call Audrey Orchid. Good morning, Audrey. Thank you.
My glasses. Yep, good morning. My name is Audrey Gherkin. I am the Council Administrator for the Council for Youths with Chronic Conditions, or CYCC. We are a state mandated, parent-driven council. We represent thousands of children and families in New Hampshire that have chronic conditions such as cancer, epilepsy, cystic fibrosis. You can get the picture. This is last year, it came about because of the pandemic. We weren't using our funds in the way we typically use our funds. So we put it into a needs assessment in collaboration with JSI. They came out, took us a year long. It was very comprehensive. We interviewed many families across the state of New Hampshire. And within those results, it found that, one of the main common themes, families caring for children with chronic health conditions experience feelings of isolation and exclusion. The results of that then, in conclusion, and it indicates the importance of access to public spaces, and it specifically recommends advocating for playground accessibility. So as you can see, we were pretty excited when this bill came up. HB 467 is a solution to the findings that we have in our report. This solid rubber or rubber composite surfacing allows for not only children and caregivers with disabilities to access playgrounds, but also their peers. I'm a big proponent of universal design. This doesn't exclude anyone, this solution. So everyone is allowed to take advantage of the playground and have fun. I will also add that I am a parent of a child with complex medical conditions. We were lucky enough that at her playground growing up in Brentwood, New Hampshire, the PT advocated very strongly for this type of flooring in the playground. And it's just been, she had a wonderful time and experience at the elementary school because she was able to play and utilize the playground with all of her peers at the same time. So, do you have any questions?
Thank you. Any questions from the committee?
Okay, thank
Seeing
you.
none, thank you. The chair will now recognize Joseph Abelardo. I see. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, committee. Thank you all for having me here this morning to speak in front of you for a few moments. So my name is Joe Papalardo. I live in Windham, New Hampshire with my wife and our 3 kids. My son is 10 years old and we have twin 5-year-old little girls. One of whom is actually the girl that Representative Katub mentioned earlier. So we've been working together on this. So one of my daughters has cerebral palsy, which is just to put quickly, it's a brain injury from around the time of birth that essentially interferes with the brain's ability to tell the muscles what to do. We're very blessed that my daughter's cognitive function is that of a normal 5-year-old kid, so she'll have full conversations with you, she'll sing songs, she's learning her numbers and letters just like every other 5-year-old, but she does use a wheelchair for the most part when we're out of the house. She also uses a walker and about 7 different other types of mobility devices. And we're hopeful that one day she'll walk, but there's no guarantee, and it's okay if she doesn't. That's just the way it goes. So when Kaya came into our lives, I sort of started reading and learning as much as I could about the community and the challenges they face, and quickly realized that this was a group that absolutely needs advocates and allies to fight for them, essentially, because they can't be up here to do it themselves. So that's where this sort of began. That's why we're here today, and that's why HB 467 is so important. One of the most challenging things about raising a child with a disability is actually it's not the disability itself, it's not getting around, it's not any of that. It's actually the fact that our society is so misunderstands them so much, frankly. We were never, when I was a kid, I don't recall ever being taught anything about disability in school. It was sort of like people sort of look at the ceiling when you walk in the room. And so I've sort of made it my mission to fight that and to help the society in general sort of understand what the needs are, and that really it's just another part of the human condition. It's not a special need. It's not something to be aspirational. It's not something that requires pity. It's just another part of what being a human can be. And I think once you sort of wrap your head around that, a lot of other things sort of become clear and obvious, at least to me. So this sort of began when one day I brought my 3 children to our local playground, and so my other 2 neurotypical children ran in and started running around and climbing with all the other kids, and I was pushing my daughter's wheelchair in, and we immediately, and it bark mulch surface, and her chair immediately started to sink, and became very clear within the first few feet that this wasn't going to work. I looked at my daughter. I could tell she was getting upset. Her eyes were sort of welling up with tears. So I picked her up and attempted to, let her be included with the other kids by holding up her arms and sort of walking around with her and trying to get her involved, which is physically very challenging to do. And at one point, I sort of twisted my back or something, and we both went down. And there we are sitting on the bark mulch, this wet bark mulch in our town, with other people sort of looking at us funny. And it was just a moment that we had that was like where the sort of the challenges that we're both about to face sort of became very clear to us. So it's sort of a defining moment for me. So I had to wrangle my other 2 children. We all, went home, drove home in silence. And I was really, obviously saddened and upset, and it's not what you want to have happen. But I think that the number one sort of feeling that I had was just sort of, I was almost furious. I was angry that, here we were in the town that I grew up in, the town where I chose to raise my family, my people, my community, and they had sort of forgotten about us. They had left us sitting in the mulch, and I think that that's where much of this journey sort of began, and it's why this has sort of become one of my missions, is to prevent that from happening to future generations of kids and families in New Hampshire. I'm sure you've heard a lot of this. Inclusive playgrounds really have a way to benefit everybody. A lot of people will think, oh, you build this whole playground for 1 or 2 children in the community. That's incorrect. The reality is that they help neurotypical children as well. They help grandparents who are now able to have experiences with their children and grandchildren that they couldn't otherwise have, because now they can access the playground as well. It allows neurotypical children to have sort of moments and connections with children with disabilities that they couldn't otherwise have, which in many ways, those experiences sort of break down those barriers that I was mentioning earlier. So it allows for these interactions that couldn't otherwise happen. So it's much more than just to allow access for a few children in the town. It really breaks down barriers for everybody. So that's why I think that they're so important. And I think it's interesting. I noticed as I was walking into the State House this morning, and I noticed that we have the ADA entrance on the side, and we have the opener buttons on the bathroom, and I noticed all of that. And so, I wonder why is it that we feel it's necessary to have that sort of accessibility in the State House, but yet we don't allow children into playgrounds. So why is that? And I think when you ask yourself that, it sort of becomes clear that there's a need for this. And I think that, that it becomes clear there. So in closing, I ask for your support today on HB 467. I think it'll send a message. I think that it allows over time, it will be a slow process where it's new facilities, but over time, it will make accessibility in playgrounds the norm, which is really how it should be. And it's doing it without twisting anybody's arm or closing down existing playgrounds. So I really think it's a good approach to ultimately end up where we want to be and move in the right direction. And it's a way to tell, all of New Hampshire's children that we love and respect them the way that they are. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
The chair will recognize Senator Abbas. Good morning.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Senator Darrell Abbas. I represent the District 22. It's communities of Pelham, Salem, Axon, and Plastow, and I'm here to testify in support of HB 467. And I'm also here on behalf of my friend from Windham, who just testified, and it's an honor to be here to speak in support of the bill. Just to answer a few questions, there was asked about the legality, if there's already laws in place. So the current standard for Americans with disabilities is reasonable accommodations. And that's always subject to debate, what is reasonable, what's not. You can take an accommodation that may be reasonable in one circumstance, but not another. What this does, it really kind of expresses what reasonable is and what is not. And I can say from my own experience, I struggle to push a stroller over that bark mulch. So a wheelchair is going to be much heavier and just more difficult. So if I find it one part that's getting lost in this as a taxpayer, anyone who's a taxpayer, these public playgrounds are built with taxpayer dollars and therefore should be accessible to all. My friend from Windham, who just testified, is a taxpayer who helps pay for these playgrounds, and they weren't accessible to his family. And we should all find that offensive. We have a chance to fix that problem, correct it going forward, so it won't happen again. So I hope the community supports the ought to pass.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Questions? Seeing none, thank you. The chair will now recognize Kathy Bates. Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Vanessa Blaze, and I serve as the Director of Policy and Planning for the New Hampshire Council on Developmental Disabilities, and I am here to read Kathy's letter. She was unable to attend today because she does not have adequate support staff. I offer this testimony today because I feel that all children, disabled or not, should have safe, accessible access to public playgrounds. I have a BA degree in elementary education as an educator who is also a wheelchair user. I was often expected to do playground duty. I could only supervise the areas of the playground that were paved because my power chair would sink into the wood chips where the playground equipment was located. I remember a time when I was supervising my class of kindergarten children. Another adult was supposed to be joining me in supervising, but she could not come out. In a matter of seconds, the kids ran out to the playground, and one of my students fell off the monkey bars. He bit his lip and was bleeding profusely. He also bumped his head. I had to get a couple of other kindergartners to help this little boy into the school. There was nothing I could do because I couldn't get to him. That was 15 years ago. but I still remember it like it was yesterday. If all public playgrounds had solid rubber or rubber composite surfacing, it would be so much more accessible and a lot safer for anyone who wanted to supervise or simply enjoy the playground. It is important to remember that many of our lifelong friendships have been forged on the playground. If children with disabilities can't access it as independently as possible, then they may not have the ability to develop the natural relationships that occur on the playground. I urge you to vote in favor of HB 467. Sincerely, Kathy Bates. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you. The chair will now recognize Ben and Durgan Crowell.
Hello,
Good morning.
my name is Ben Kroll. I'm with Durgan and Kroll Lumber Company. I oppose Senate Bill or House Bill 467. I do support access for everybody on the playgrounds. We provide, we manufacture a engineered wood fiber from our sawmill chips, an all-natural product that we spend thousands of dollars every year to make sure it's certified under ADA guidelines. It's a wood chip. It's not a bark mulch. It is compliant. And my fear with a bill like this, you're going to start putting rubber on playgrounds where wood chips work and are, safer in my opinion. We have fall testing. We're rated up to 20 feet now. Hopefully a kid does not fall 20 feet onto our product, but we were rated up to 20 feet. I don't think any rubber products could ever say that. So the safety factor, I think, also needs to be taken into account. We're an ADA compliant. We're sustainably harvested, SFI certified, and we're a natural product made right here in the great state of New Hampshire. So and that's all I have.
Questions from the committee? Yes. Senator Chandler.
Thank you. The concern that has been raised so far really has to do with access to the equipment. I understand your product is underneath the equipment. Is that correct?
Yes.
Follow up?
Yes.
So in terms of the pathways, what we're hearing from those who are testifying is that the pathways using this product are apparently not providing the necessary surface to move assistance, the assisting devices along those pathways. Has that been your experience?
So when they test our product to make it ADA compliant, they compact it and they run wheelchairs over it. I think probably what we're talking about is a maintenance issue, not a certified issue. If the playgrounds are properly maintained, then the wheelchairs should be able to roll right over our product, no problem.
And one more follow-up?
Yes.
If it is a maintenance issue that is impeding the mobility assistance devices, what would that maintenance then be? What do you recommend?
I think raking and flattening, but I'm not an expert in that aspect. Yep.
Any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you for your
Okay,
testimony.
thank you. Thank you very much.
The chair will recognize Jason Stock.
Good morning.
Good morning.
For the record, my name's Jason Stock. I'm the Executive Director of the New Hampshire Timberland Owners Association. And this is a difficult bill. And I'm here speaking in opposition to the bill as it's drafted. You heard a little bit from the prior speaker about some of our concerns. And I wanted to elaborate a little bit on his testimony and try to provide some clarity and hopefully a path forward here that would work for everyone. When we read the language of the bill, it is very prescriptive. It is to the point where if it's it is prescriptive down to the composite material, polyurethane, rubber composite material. And when our members who manage, and just by way of background, I think I know all of you, but just for the record, I represent timberland owners in the state's forest products industry. And a number of our members, I should say, produce a wood fiber product. It's not bark mulch. It's not like a chip that you would think about as you would put around your landscaping. It is a fiber. It's an engineered product that, when installed properly, they install the product. They compact it. It's a 12-inch lift. And it's compacted. And as you heard from Ben earlier, this does meet the ADA accessibility standard, whether it's a pathway or whether it's directly under the swing set or jungle gym or whatever they have on playgrounds these days. It's been a while since my kids have been on them. But it is, and when they test it, they do ensure that a wheelchair can get around on it. And so the bill would preclude the use of that product just by the nature of its prescriptive text. It's a urethane or a rubber composite material. So in my mind, that knocks any type of wood fiber out of the box. Moreover, and despite the testimony of the sponsor, when I read the language, I do believe it could be interpreted that this would apply to existing playgrounds as well. And where I see that is in line 4. It says, any playground constructed for use on or after January 2024. So if I have a playground that was constructed, it's a public playground, it's constructed for use after January 1, 2024. To me, and I'm not an attorney, I'm a timber woods guy, but to me, when I read that language, that says, all right, on January 2nd, 2024, that playground, to be compliant, would have to have a resilient rubber or a urethane rubber composite surfacing or a similar resilient solid surface material. Again, similar, wood fiber is not similar to composite or a urethane composite rubber material. And then it goes on to say loose fill or aggregate. So again, when I read the language and I look at its implication and how prescriptive it is, I do believe that it would preclude the use of this product, which we see it is being used in the state, and we do believe the plain text of this language would apply to existing playgrounds. I provided 2 letters of testimony from a couple facilities that produce this material, this engineered fiber material. And just to kind of give you a perspective, kind of their perspective, one is actually he's an employee, works with Durgan and Kroll, from John Baker, and he does list the accessibility ASTM standards for it. And as I understand it, the way that works, and again, this is from talking to the folks at Durgan and Kroll, to hit the accessibility standard, you also must comply with public playground surfacing some of the prior. So this is more of an additive process. It's not just, all right, check the box and you're good to go. There is an additive process here. So with that, I would just ask the committee to contemplate this when looking at the bill. Again, I think accessibility is important. And I would just say that, you know, if the bill were to not be as prescriptive and enable ADA accessible, you know, an ADA approved material, that would be, I think that would go a long way, because these materials, these businesses are producing a material. They've gone through the time, they've gone through the expense of getting their material approved. They're not just cranking out wood chips and selling them to towns and playgrounds and schools. They have a manufactured product, an engineered design product that is actually intended for this use. So I would say the language not be as prescriptive and would enable the use of some of these materials, such as the wood fiber. I would also add that, you know, there is a benefit, you know, I'll put my environmental hat on, there is a benefit to having a natural, you know, natural product out there, not a product that may have to get ripped up after a certain period of time and put into a landfill. There is some benefit to that as well. That should be also contemplated. Again, I appreciate the opportunity to come and share these thoughts with you. I understand and fully support the intent of this bill. Believe me, I do. But I just think this would, the ramifications of such a prescriptive bill would have implications well beyond just kind of what we're talking about this morning. With that, I'll be happy to try to answer any questions. And if the committee is looking to amend it or work on it, would be happy to participate in that process. Thank you.
Questions? Senator Chanley.
Thank you. You are not a lawyer, nor am I, but I think that if I look at the first concern you raised, simply removing the words "for use" would resolve that problem, I think, as you've described it. I don't know if you would agree.
I would, although I would hate to see the use of this product precluded on any playground constructed after January 2024. But I agree, if you were to, any playground constructed after January 1, 2024, to me, that is much more clear and concise. But it does carry with it the implication that anything new, no wood fiber.
And then my follow-up is, does the wood product you're describing, would it meet the definition resilient solid surface material?
I looked at those. I don't know. You know, and again, this, as we all know, words can be funny. Is it a resilient solid surface that is not a loose fill or aggregate? It's a wood fiber. They bring it in when it's installed properly. They bring it in, they wet it, they compact it, they wet it, they compact it to kind of create this. And again, these are small fibers, so they knit together. Is that a solid surface material? Certainly water would percolate through it. If you think about a rainstorm, you're not going to have water puddling on it. So from that perspective, it probably is not a solid surface, but yet a wheelchair can roll across it. Again, this is part of the challenge with such prescriptive language, is kind of, what does that mean? You know, asphalt. I grew up in the days where our playground was asphalt, and it was accessible, but holy cow, the raspberries that you'd come home after falling off of the seesaws and all were pretty brutal. So I come back to the language of how prescriptive it is, and that to me is problematic.
Thank you.
I did want to, oh, did you have a question?
No, go right ahead.
I just wanted to ask, so, first of all, thank you for sharing your information and your testimony. Even though the product is ADA approved, and I understand, your concerns with it, but if it's approved but not working, then what would you suggest? Because we're hearing testimony that these young children cannot access their playground. So even if something is ADA approved, that doesn't mean it works.
Great question. Yeah, I heard the same testimony, and I heard wood chips, I heard wet bark mulch, which is different. And I think we all would agree. Wet bark mulch and wood chips are, those are products that would be difficult to have a wheelchair cross. What I'm talking about is a different product. And so again, before we kind of venture into this, are we comparing apples to apples? This is an engineered wood fiber product. It gets ground, reground, sized, and then when it's installed, compacted. That is very different than bark mulch or just wood chips out the back of a Asplin chipper blown onto the ground. Yeah. And so again, I'm concerned that we may not be comparing apples to apples. And
Thank you.
I remember the asphalt playgrounds. You learned not to fall. It was accessible but suboptimal. Yeah.
Oh yeah, we had a awesome jungle gym, but holy
You didn't
cow.
want to fall. You only fell once.
All right. Well, thank you for the opportunity to testify. And again, I'll reiterate, if the committee deliberates on this and contemplates changes, we're happy to work with you and try to find a solution that works with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. The chair will recognize Aubrey Friedman.
Madam Chair, committee members, Aubrey Friedman, Bridgewater, private citizen. When I first looked at this bill, you see the rubber structures everywhere these days, and so didn't seem like that very controversial of a bill. But what bothers me about it is this would be a state law, meaning each town will have to design their playgrounds the same way. So it's a one size fits all. That already bothers me right there. I say let each town decide how they want to do it because they're the ones who pay for it. So it turns out it's actually more complicated than I thought. There are different ways to approach this issue of playground safety. And as was been mentioned already, you've got engineered wood fiber, grass, artificial turf, play sand and pea gravel, rubber mulch, and playground wood chips. So there are other ways to design a playground. This particular bill talks about the entrance through the exit. It's all got to be rubber oriented. And so I could see where, the area right around the structures, you might want that more rubber, but then the entrances, you could have other things. So, you could have a combination, and this bill seems more, it's got to be rubber from beginning to end. And it turns out rubber has a few problems of its own. It has, the cost is the big thing. It's very expensive. Carbon wood print, it's not natural, gives off toxic gases, and also it's very hot. When the weather's hot, it becomes, burning hot. So, and the biggest problem with rubber apparently is how it's installed. If it's not installed correctly, which apparently happens quite a bit, instead of lasting 10 to 15 years, it lasts only 2 to 3 years and they have to redo it all over. So, it's more, there's more to this than just one way of looking at it. And as I say, the thing that bothered me the most was every town has to do it the same way. And so that's my problem. There was this question about, is it new construction or old? And when the sponsor brought it up in the beginning, she said, no, we're talking about new construction. But the previous gentleman who just spoke, he brought it up again, and it is the wording, because here in the analysis, it says playgrounds in use on or after January 1st. And then on here, under 15583, it says constructed for use on or after. So I was kind of confused myself. And so I think the intent is to make it for new playgrounds, which would make more sense, because if all the towns had to go and change them all now, it would be a ridiculous cost for all the towns, and the taxes would go up and everybody would have a fit. So that's just a little language problem with it, which I'm sure could be fixed, but it's the one size all that really bothers me. And that's why I speak in opposition to this bill. Yeah, but are there any questions?
Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
The chair will now call Nate Grace. Good morning.
Morning. Thank you, Madam Chair. Nate Grace for the Municipal Association. We are neutral on the bill, but I'm commenting favorably. Our reading of the bill is the same as Senator Abbas, which was that this would be basically the same applicability as the ADA, and that it's new playgrounds that are constructed or substantial rehabilitations, meaning basically they take down all the equipment, take off the surfacing, and put something new in there. So to that end, we did do a 28A analysis, and we do not believe that this violates 28A because it would simply clarify what type of materials are acceptable, which are already under the designation required by the ADA. So we don't think this is a new mandate. It would simply, well, as you heard from stories from Wyndham and Exeter, those communities installed materials that were ADA compliant. As it turns out, there was either a maintenance issue or an installation issue, whatever the case may be. They turned out not to be ADA compliant after a period of time, and they had to go back in and spend a significant amount of money to redo those. So I don't really have much else to add other than that, other than to say that this would just sort of clarify the acceptable scope of what materials would work for New Hampshire. Happy to take any questions that the committee may have.
Thank you. Any questions?
Thank
Seeing
you.
none, thank you very much. The chair will now recognize Roy Shoemaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman and members of the committee. I'm Roy Schweiker from Concord, and this particularly attracted my attention for two things. Number one, the point that the senator has pointed out that probably you need to remove those two words "for use" in order to make sure that this is only for future construction and not existing ones. I mean, and I will point out that if this confused the people that wrote the analysis, it may confuse other people further along. You really need to get those gone. The second thing that really bugged me about it, and I'm surprised you didn't ask the Municipal Association about it, is they stated there is no fiscal impact of this bill. I mean, every playground that's going to be built henceforth has got to have a product that apparently is far more expensive and requires more maintenance. So I would say there's definitely a fiscal impact for this bill. I think it's unfortunate that the committee has not been informed as to how much that physical impact might be based on how many playgrounds are built or reconstructed every year and what the extra cost would be. And I don't know why the Municipal Association didn't pick up on that, but certainly there's some real money involved here. So, you know, I hate to have you, voting on something you don't completely understand because that number is missing. And like I say, the other thing is remove that "for use." And lastly, we've heard some testimony from some people that apparently provide a green product that's not petroleum based, that they claim will do the same thing. And if the committee really wanted to get into revising some things here, they might, come up with a, should we say, functional specification rather than a prescriptive specification, that it would be built and maintained so that wheelchairs can run on it. So, sure, if you want to use this wood product and it requires a little bit more raking than if you put down the rubber, then, that has to be built into the cost of your operation. but I think that, tossing out some product that may, use less petrochemicals just because some people have bad experiences with similar products is not the way to go. So, whether you want to take this on as a goal this time around or not, I don't know. And the last thing I'll say is regarding accommodations, there do exist all-terrain wheelchairs that are kind of like mountain bikes compared to regular bikes. They have fat tires. They can go on trails in the woods and stuff. And I'm not suggesting that you require every person that requires a wheelchair to have one. But for instance, the school they were talking about where the kid couldn't go on the playground, if they were to buy one all-terrain wheelchair or however many they might need, so kids during recess could go out and use the playground, that would certainly be a quicker solution to this than having them to tear up all their playgrounds and put down rubber. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. The chair will recognize Jennifer Bertrand. Nice to see you, Jennifer. See you.
Good morning, Acting Chair, Senator Ricciardi, and members of the Senate Commerce Committee. Appreciate your time, patience, and careful consideration. My name is Jennifer Bertrand, and I live in Mount Vernon, New Hampshire. I'm a proud mom of 4 children. My now young adult daughter, Chloe, experiences a disability, and I'm here to ask you today to support House Bill 467. Shouldn't homeowners who pay property taxes be able to access the public spaces in their communities? And this is really what the crux of this bill is about. Clearly, there is clarification that's needed under the law, and putting policy into practice can be tricky. But with this clarification, we can remove unnecessary barriers to kids with disabilities so they can enjoy a sense of belonging in their communities, and maybe for their grandparents who also might experience a disability. When my daughter Chloe was in middle school, she had to undergo a pretty serious orthopedic surgery. She had a tendon transfer and a heel cord lengthening, which resulted her being in a long leg cast for more than 2 months. She couldn't bear any weight on her leg during that time. And being a person with a physical disability, it was really difficult to help meet her accessibility needs. There were no playgrounds locally in and around Mount Vernon or Amherst that were accessible because the playgrounds used that EWF wood fiber material. And we'd have to drive all the way down to Nashua to exit 1. Roby Park had the kind of design that there was a hard surface area from the entrance of the playground that went around to the perimeter and then to each pieces of equipment. And while she was using a wheelchair for her mobility, I was able to wheel her up to the equipment. Chloe loves the swings, and she was able to get outside and recover quicker, being mentally happy and emotionally happy and being connected and having that time outdoors. I wanted to address a couple of the concerns that came up during the previous testimonies. There's no doubt in my mind that initially, if it's installed properly, EWF meets those basic accessibility guidelines. This is not an installation issue per se, it's a maintenance issue, which is very costly for towns. And to my knowledge, towns don't have huge budgets to be raking and compressing this material on a week-to-week basis, let alone a month or several times a year. And if you look at the provisions or how the bill is written, in lines 8 and 9, it says beginning at I'll go back to 7, or starting on 6. Include accessible pathways made from resilient rubber or urethane rubber composite surfacing or a similar resilient solid surface material
that is not a loose fill or aggregate, beginning at the entrance of the playground, continuing around to each piece of the playground equipment and extending to the playground exit. Certainly, there could be a combination if towns want to use EWF with some other material. If towns do have a maintenance budget to ensure that the material remains accessible, they could choose to do that. This bill gives sufficient flexibility for towns to create and design playgrounds that are appropriate for them. We live in the Northeast, and with the material, EWF material, because of our climate, it makes it more difficult to maintain it and ensure that accessibility. When we take a universal design approach to designing our playgrounds and our communities, it means that we honor all citizens, not allowing when kids and other people with disabilities aren't able to access their public spaces. It really says that like they're second-class citizens. The spirit of the ADA is consistent with the intent of this bill. This is a really well thought out piece of legislation, and I do urge you to support it. So please support House Bill 467. Let's work together. Let's remove unnecessary barriers so all the children and members of our community can achieve a sense of belonging. This will also help to reduce maintenance costs down the road. I remember on the House side when this bill was heard that there was extensive costs that went into renovating another playground, and if they had known from the get-go some of the challenges and downfalls to using all of EWF as their only material on the playground, it ended up costing them a lot of money. And this bill will help towns save money as they plan and create and design their own playgrounds. Just seeing if there was anything else that I wanted to speak to. I think that's it. Does the committee have any questions? Okay.
Seeing none, thank you very much. Are there any other members of the public that would like to speak to House Bill 467? Would you please approach? Thank you.
Hi, thank you very much for having me. I was not planning on testifying at all today. My name is Karen Livernoy. I'm from Londonderry, New Hampshire. I am here as a council chair for the Council for Youth with Chronic Conditions, and I literally just came to physically support those that were speaking today. But as I was listening to all of the testimony, it touched me. I am a proud mom of 4 children. My third child utilized a wheelchair for the 10 years that she was alive. And I'm listening to all these ADA compliance and people saying it's compliant, but we had a playground built in our town, and it was supposedly ADA compliant. I continually asked the planning committee, can you show me where it's compliant? And they did. Can you show me how my daughter in a wheelchair can access the equipment? And they showed me their ADA compliant playground with a picture of a child outside the playground on the walkway watching the other children play. And I contested that, and they agreed they were ADA compliant with whatever materials they were using. The first day that we went to go use that new playground, I could not get my 10-year-old's wheelchair across that ADA compliant material. So whether or not we're compliant, we should be considering, can our children access this? I listened to the man who started this and testified, we're not looking, the all-terrain wheelchairs, I won't even go there, at $2,000 a piece. I couldn't get one if I wanted one. But why are we fighting having appropriate access for our children to play on a playground? It doesn't make any sense. And we look at the bill itself, it says, or other material that is, I just lost it, sorry, I wasn't prepared, or similar resilient solid surface material. Those of us that push, use, or have any access to a wheelchair knows it has to be solid. It doesn't matter, even grass, if you go through it, it bunches up, it gets stuck in the wheelchairs. You have big wheels on some wheelchairs and little chairs, wheels and wheelchairs. Wood chips get stuck in there. And then it's even harder to push. So again, I don't have a very articulate testimony today, but I was really, really touched by some of the questions that weren't even looked at today. So I do strongly encourage you to pass the HB 467.
Thank you very much.
President?
Okay, thank you. I'll ask again, are there any other members of the public that would like to speak to House Bill 467? Okay, seeing none, we will close the hearing on HB 467. Thank you. We're going to take a 10-minute recess.
For patients, I would love to come to the Senate to testify. An appreciation for taking Thank you. Don't worry about anything else. Clean it up. Don't worry. Go to the Montford Turning. The kids keep getting their papers to create these. There's no way. Which is fine. To me, it's great. I forgot to mention on the back of my testimony, I included some challenges around, and in terms of both environmental, you know, as well, and they don't just Thank you for your questions and your leaning towards study. I really appreciate it. Yeah, it's tension. Folks, your family's
Intentional. What's his business? Your venue and all right, good.
So I turned the volume.
Yeah.
Completely up. You know the name? The chairs. See, Mike.
No, I'm wrong.
RICC. CCIA.
The one to our right is INIS. Next person to the left of the choose would be G.A. Gannon, G.A. And then, what do you know? No. Next person, left would be Susie, S-U-C-Y. Yes, I have some of the game. Last person, C-H-A-N-D. I understand it.
We're still in morning. Good morning. We're going to open up the hearing on House Bill 235. I do want to ask that we start limiting our testimony to 3 minutes when possible, because we have a lot of more bills and a lot of people signed up. So thank you in advance. The first speaker is Richard Head.
Oh, we do.
Oh, well, there's no.
I can.
Okay,
This is 235. 235.
yes. Oh, and do you see Senator Rosenbaum? 'Cause she's on. Let me see. She's just in support, not speaking. Okay, never mind.
All right. Good morning, Senators. Dan Ennis, representing District 7 from Bradford, New Hampshire, and it's my pleasure to introduce House Bill 235, which is a bill that establishes a legislative committee to study the landlord and tenant mediation program in circuit courts. If you have any questions, they're best saved for the folks who will testify behind me. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. Okay. The chair will recognize Richard Head, Judicial Branch.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Richard Head. I'm the Government Affairs Coordinator for the Judicial Branch. We do not have a position on this bill. I just wanted to briefly describe sort of what it is we're talking about and add a couple facts relative to this that may assist you in terms of your decision making. We have currently a landlord-tenant mediation program. It is broken up into two parts. One is an eviction diversion program that occurs prior to the filing of any eviction paperwork with the court system. We provide notice in a variety of ways of this program. It is entirely voluntary of both landlords and tenants, but we do have pamphlets. We have, when we speak at events, we talk about it. It's on the new eviction notice form. This program is described in it. And, it provides an opportunity for landlords and tenants to speak with a mediator, try to, reach resolution in any way that they can. There's no sort of guardrails in terms of what they're allowed to agree to, as long as it's ultimately legal. And it gives really an opportunity to avoid the court process. It is, as I said, entirely voluntary. And if the parties are unable to reach agreement, there's no penalty for not reaching agreement. It's simply an opportunity to get in front of a mediator and work with a mediator. In addition to that pre-filing program, we have a program in Concord, Manchester, and Nashua after filing that allows parties, again, to enter into a mediation, again, entirely voluntary. And in Concord, the parties are notified in advance that they have an opportunity to essentially opt out of the mediation program. In Manchester, in Nashua, it occurs on the day of the hearing when they come into court. If they choose to, they speak with a mediator. They have anywhere between a half hour to 2 hours. And both of these types of mediations are without any cost to the parties. We are currently funding this through grant funding. So it is not involved in any general funds. And we currently have a HUD grant of about $550,000. We anticipate that will continue to fund this program through 2025. We've gotten very positive reports back. We ask the parties to voluntarily participate in filling out a survey. We've generally found that over 90% have responded saying that they were fully informed as to what they were able to do. In the in-court mediation process, we have about a 75% success rate, and generally very positive, favorable feedback on this program. One thing that may be useful to you in terms of putting together a study committee is we have retained Resolution Systems Institute to evaluate the program internally to see where there are positive and negative aspects of it, where we can have improvements and collect data. That, unfortunately, in terms of this bill, will not have a report until October 31st, which essentially probably means that report would not be available to the study committee. But we are hoping to do our own internal study, our own evaluation. That report will obviously be available to the legislative body, but I suspect not available in time for any study committee should you go forward with this. With the study committee. With that, I will conclude my comments, but I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
The chair will now recognize Tom DeRosa.
Good morning,
Morning.
Madam Chair and members of the committee. Tom Rose with Housing Action New Hampshire. We are a statewide organization of over 80 businesses and organizations united around affordable housing policy and ending homelessness in New Hampshire. Here in support of this, as you just heard, I think it's working well with the funding to go through 2025. We think it makes sense to study and support it, fully supportive. And I'll leave it at that in the interest of time.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much. Are there any other members of the public that would like to speak to House? Please come approach. Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. I apologize to the board for not signing earlier. I was so focused on HB 117. My name is Jessica Margerson, and I am a tenant organizer with Granite State Organizing Project. I live in Manchester, New Hampshire, and why this bill is important to me. I helped multiple tenants utilize the mediation program at my tenant clinic. I myself went through the program. I do have an ask for when you're putting this study together, because I agree with this. I think there should be a study. I'm in support of it. But I ask that a tenant and a landlord be added to the study so that they would be able to speak to what is intrinsic to them and what is needed. The 75% success rate is wonderful, but we all know that came because of the NHERAP application and the money that was readily available to pay the back rent and future rent at day of mediation. When you are in mediation, what is said in mediation cannot be then said in court. This becomes confusing for the tenant. Stuff like that needs to be worked out. So this study will be great to create pamphlets for it, maybe find some resources to add to it, because I think it was a very good resource for the courts, the people, and the landlords. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other members of the public that would like to speak to House Bill 235? Okay, seeing none, we'll close the hearing on House Bill 235, and we will open the hearing for House Bill 477. Thank you. Is there someone here to introduce this bill?
Well, no. Yeah, go ahead. I work for TIPS. Again, Dan Ennis from Bradford, New Hampshire, representing District 7, and I'm introducing House Bill 477. This bill will prohibit municipal inspections of owner-occupied units within residential structures of 4 units or less. And the crux of the bill can be found in lines 8 through 10 of the bill, bill itself. So if you have questions, I'm sure those will be answered by the testimony that is to follow. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The chair will call Aubrey Friedman. Good morning again.
Oh, hello. Aubrey Friedman, Bridgewater, private citizen. I speak in support of this bill. This is a right to privacy bill. And having government officials enter your property without your permission is busybodyism, and I do not like it. I think it's terrible. The New Hampshire Constitution is very clear on this matter. Part 1, Article 2B, right of privacy, and I quote, "An individual's right to live free from government intrusion in private or personal information is natural, essential, and inherent." That's what this bill is all about. They cannot come into your property without permission. Now, if there is a really legitimate problem, they can get an administrative warrant and do it the right way, and then whether you give permission or not, they can come in, but they've got to do it the right way, get a warrant. And just because it's up to a 4-unit building doesn't mean that those people who live in the building gave up their constitutional rights to privacy. Whether it's 1 unit, 2, 3, or 4 units, you still have the right to privacy. You're not a second-class citizen. And it would be just like the tax assessors. They cannot come into your property unless you give them permission. So just because it's 4 families are living in a building shouldn't be any different. Right to privacy is critical, and that's why I support this bill. Are there any questions?
Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
The chair will recognize Nate Grace. No. Well, did Nate leave? Okay. Did Sean Toomey want to speak? It was scratched out and then, so I'm not clear. Okay. Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Sean Toomey. I'm the State Fire Marshal. Thank you for the opportunity to speak this morning. In general, we oppose the bill as written from the perspective of life safety provisions. Understand the speaker before spoke to privacy. We do understand the privacy provisions and would look for consent like we do with any inspections. We understand the intent of the original bill was to prohibit routine inspections as part of a compliance program. And we believe the way that the bill is written would potentially prohibit inspections for any work, like any new work that might take place that's properly permitted for units up to 4 families. We heard at the initial hearings in the House that the prime sponsor spoke that he didn't believe the bill was written quite as well as it should have been. It was ITL'd out of the committee and then reversed on the floor, as I understand it. The Building Code Review Board and the Building Officials Association also oppose it. We're concerned that the mechanical systems, electrical systems, fire protection systems, simple smoke and carbon monoxide systems, and means of egress or escape would be a concern if there's no inspections on multi-unit buildings. One consideration we thought would make sense is also to align, if there's a potential amendment to be considered working with the sponsor, is to align it with the other code classifications in the codes. We look at 1 and 2 family dwellings. A lot of things are for 1 and 2 family dwellings are exempt in statute and rule in the codes as they are right now. But to expand it to a 4 family is a little bit more than what we typically do. We have a lot of fire history in the state and losses both from a property perspective and life loss in multifamily dwellings, and we're just concerned that if there's 0 inspections allowed, that could be concerning. So happy to work with the sponsor and look at some options. We understand where he's coming from. It was a duplex situation, lived in one side, rented the other side. He just didn't want someone coming through his space. I grew up in a duplex in Manchester, and my parents had the same problem. And they lived there for years, moved away. When they lived there, it was fine. They moved away and came back, and then all of a sudden their unit was being inspected regularly, and they scratched their head and saying, "What's the difference?" So I think there's some room to adjust this if possible, working with a sponsor. So that's about all I had this morning. Happy to answer any questions.
Oh, thank you very much. Any questions?
I have one. Thank you for taking the question. Isn't every building inspected for code when it's significantly renovated or built new? And having renovated 4 historic properties, my own, and built 2 new ones, I know that tends to be how it works. Why would there be a need in any other circumstance for an inspection that follows that? We don't go back and re-inspect a house, let's say, after 3 years. We do it if there's a major renovation or some other significant change.
Correct. So most communities have a certificate of inspection or certificate of occupancy program after new work and inspections, and that's done in almost most of the communities. There's many communities in the state that lack building inspection and then those communities don't do it. It relies on the contract, and there's language in the statute that the contractors have to follow the state building and fire codes.
Exactly.
This, as I understand the intent of this bill, was to tackle an issue in the city of Manchester that has a certificate of compliance program that requires inspections of rental property every 3 years.
Gotcha.
And they were trying to prohibit the inspectors from Manchester from coming in the owner's unit themselves. And I think the way this is written would prohibit all inspections. So we put a new gas system or a new electrical upgrade in the unit, and it impacts the entire building. That inspection would become off the table, we believe, under the language as it's written today.
Okay.
So that's really our concern, is that this would wipe off all inspections for all work moving forward. And
Okay, I
that makes
understand.
sense. Thank you.
That makes sense. Would there be language that we could add or change that would make this better and still accomplish the underlying purpose of the bill?
I think so. I'd like to work with a couple of the other stakeholders to make sure we get it right, obviously, but I think there's probably somewhere we can get to on that. I don't have it off the top of my head today, but I believe we can meet the intent of what they're trying to do.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, Nate Graves, would you like to come forward? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I apologize for my tardiness. I unfortunately am double booked this morning. Nate Grace for the Municipal Association. We do oppose this bill. Just to build off what Marshall Toomey just said, we're certainly willing to work with him, other stakeholders, the sponsor, to look to see if there's some sort of agreement we can come to. I just want to speak a little bit about the process in Manchester, because that's where this originates from. So Manchester has its own locally adopted housing code. That is a local ordinance that applies to rental properties. And it's really kind of based in RSA 48A, which is the minimum standards for rental properties. And 48A14 covers a lot of the same ground that Manchester's housing code would cover. And essentially, what it requires is an inspection every 3 years of rental units or units that could be rented, and does not have an exemption for owner-occupied sides of those. And that's how this kind of inspection came in place. So it's not really, as written in the bill before you, any sort of state building code inspection. It's really has to do with rental inspections. It sounds like Marshall Toomey and perhaps others testifying before me have clarified that a bit, and we're certainly willing to work to see if we can make this work for everyone.
Thank you very much. Questions from the committee? Seeing none,
Thank
thank
you.
you very much. Are there any other member, you may come forward.
117 means a lot to a lot of us. I apologize. Again, my name is Jessica Margison, and HB 477 made me about shoot off my seat, and why this means so much to me. Our building department in Manchester is why I exist today. 336 Lake Ave, back in 2007, multiple issues. Without the building department there would have been nobody there to make them fix my heater, to make them fix my stove, to make them fix the multiple issues that condemned multiple units in my building. How this relates to a landlord-occupied building. Fast forward many years, and I'm now a tenant advocate. I'm living in 233 Grove Street. That's the address you're going to want to write down and Google it. 233 Grove Street. My landlord's name was Matt. It was a 3-unit building. I lived on the 3rd floor. He lived on the 1st. I had to go to court with him. 48A14 is wonderful state statutes when you're in court. It does not give you any power talking. You may tell your landlord that you have these rights. Will they use them or not? If they don't, you can prevail yourself in court with 48A14, but that building department is essential. It's so essential that I worked myself to be a part of the Manchester Housing Commission, to be able to create changes to our building department code where loopholes exist. And where this would create another loophole is that landlord. He was arrested months after I went to multiple court visits with him for sicking his dog on his girlfriend. They found multiple rounds of ammunition, multiple guns. And while guns are allowed, I realized at that point that I had pressed this landlord in court and won 2 months of retaliation against him in multiple things. And that danger was there. And I didn't know it existed. But I luckily had the building department to help me through that. So the building department can uphold code violations. It took about 6 inspections to get him to comply. He did everything from spray paint my walls to using outdoor paint inside, putting an O2 sensor in the basement and telling me to hold my breath when I had to go flip a switch on my electrical outlet. So without the building department there to make sure that the residents are safe, that is a scary situation. If a private homeowner would like to invite someone into their home to live with them, that's great. Let's stay out of their home. That's their home. But when you have a good or a service and you are inviting someone into there to rent and occupy that, that's a little bit different than someone's private home. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would anyone else like to speak from the public on House Bill 477? Seeing none, we will close the hearing on House Bill 477, and we will open the hearing on House Bill 117.
We have someone for this one.
Yeah.
Very good.
Hi, good morning, members of the committee. My name is Bob Lynn. I'm a state rep from Wyndham, and I'm the prime sponsor of this bill. In order to explain why enactment of this bill is important, let me ask you all to participate in a brief quiz to yourself that deals with this issue. Assume that you own a 2 or 3 family rental double or triple decker property that you don't live in. So it's therefore restricted property, which means that the full landlord tenant laws apply to that property. You enter into a lease for one of the units let's say to rent the property for a year to a tenant for, let's say, $2,000 a month. So here's the question. What's the term of the lease contract? A, 1 year. B, forever. C, 1 year for the tenant, but forever for you as the landlord. Now, common sense would tell you that the answer is A, obviously, right? I just said it was a 1 year contract. So the answer is A, isn't it? No. Under New Hampshire law, as it currently exists, the answer is C. And that is a result of a 2005 Supreme Court decision called Aimco Properties versus Dieselwitz. And pursuant to that decision, the term of the lease contract is 1 year for the tenant, but it is forever for the landlord. Stop and think about that for a moment. A single contract has one meaning for one party to the contract, but an entirely different meaning for the other party to the contract. This completely unprecedented violation of basic contract rights results from the Supreme Court's conclusion that the termination of the term of a tenancy does not constitute good cause for evicting a tenant who does not want to leave. The rationale for the court's decision was that the landlord's contract rights really are unimportant in the case of restricted property because the only thing the landlord should be concerned about is getting paid and having a tenant who does not damage the property or disrupt other tenants. Therefore, as long as the tenant does not violate any of these requirements, the tenant can stay as long as he or she wants. Of course, this rationale does not work both ways. At the end of the lease term, the tenant is free to move out without any adverse consequences. The weakness of the court's reasoning in the case was pointed out in the concurring opinion of Justice Joseph Netto, an appointee of Governor Shaheen. Here's what he said. Under the majority's interpretation, lease provisions purporting to limit the lease to a specified duration have no meaning. The effect of the majority's interpretation is to create a perpetual tenancy, virtually a life interest, in favor of a tenant of restricted property covered by the statute. I do not believe that was the intent of the landlord-tenant statutes. The court's decision was ostensibly made to protect tenants' rights. In reality, however, the decision has the effect of reducing the availability of housing to those who likely are the most vulnerable. Consider the landlord who must decide whether to rent to a tenant that appears questionable. Maybe the tenant has a spotty credit history or a contentious personality that may mean he might have problems getting along with other tenants. If the landlord knows that a one-year lease really means what it says, he might be willing to take a chance on that person knowing that his maximum period of exposure is 1 year. But under the law as it now stands, the landlord knows that if he rents the unit to this person, he may be stuck with him forever. As a result, the landlord in all likelihood will decide not to take the risk, which means that this person will not get the housing he needs. This bill does contain an exception for very short-term leases of 6 months or less, because in such cases, there usually is an expectation by both parties that the tenancy will be extended for at least that 6-month period. I would ask you to support this bill and restore the law so that it means what it should mean, that property rights are important, that contracts mean what they say, and so that landlords are not discouraged from renting to people who do not fit the model of the ideal tenant. So I ask you to support this bill, and I'm happy to take any questions you might have.
Thank you very much. Any questions?
Thank you.
Thank you.
The chair will call Aubrey Friedman.
Aubrey Friedman, Madam Chair, committee members, Aubrey Friedman, Bridgewater. This bill I'm in total support of. This is all about property rights. And if you rent to a tenant and you have a contract, it's a voluntary, was entered into voluntarily by both parties, and it's got to be honored. And if you've got the period there, then that's it. And if it can just be ignored, then you really don't have property rights, and you don't have control of your property. And if the government has any role in this, it's to uphold contracts, agreed to by both parties, not to break them. And so, as just was mentioned, the sponsor of the bill, what happens in real life is that people who have the resources to rent out properties will just decline to do this. And so you get less housing and you get higher, it's the unforeseen consequences we see in New Hampshire and all over the country right now, which is low inventory, not much rentals available, and of course higher prices. So what we really see here is two things. I kind of want to make a point on this. So there are definitely some tenants who would benefit from the way the law is interpreted right now, is you get to stay in your apartment, and so you don't have to worry about, fighting the housing rental market and so forth. They benefit. You can see that. What you don't see is all the other people scrambling around looking for rentals that aren't available because property owners said, I'm not going to enter into this kind of business where you lose control of your property. So we have those who benefit and all those that we don't see that are struggling to find rentals. So it's important to consider the people we don't see that are struggling to find rentals. And I offer as proof, I used to live in the city of San Francisco. I lived there for 24 years before I moved here. And that city is an example of exactly what goes wrong when you have all these tenant protection laws, is you have people who actually this 10% of the housing in San Francisco is vacant, and yet you have 8,000 estimated homeless people in the city. And of course, the rents are ridiculous. When I left there in 2018, it was almost $3,700 for a one-bedroom apartment. And we're talking a very moderate one. I don't know what it might be now. This is the real-life consequences of not honoring property rights and having full control of your property. You just get distortions, and actually what's supposed to help the people on the lower end actually hurts them the most. So that's why I support this bill. Let's support property rights, and a lease is a lease, a contract is a contract, and that's how it should be. Are there any questions?
Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Representative Kathy Staub.
Good morning. Thank you, Madam Chairman. For the record, my name is Kathy Staub. I represent Ward 5 in Manchester, which is Hillsborough, District 25. Thank you for taking my testimony. I'm here this morning to speak in opposition to House Bill 117. There are three things that I would like you to consider that go beyond the contract law and property rights arguments for this piece of legislation. The first is the impact on the citizens of New Hampshire who rent. We are currently in the middle of a housing crisis. New Hampshire currently has a vacancy rate of under 1%. A healthy rental market has a vacancy rate of 5%. Rents have risen 24% in the last 5 years, and the average two-bedroom apartment costs $1,500 a month. There are over 150,000 renters households in the state, and the majority of them have leases. Under the proposed law, as many as 10,000 renters could be at risk of losing their homes every month. Renters in my district include veterans and elderly folks on fixed incomes, people with disabilities, and individuals and families who live paycheck to paycheck. Given the current housing shortage and escalating rents, finding a new place to live is difficult and expensive. Most of them cannot afford the application fees, security deposits, truck rentals, and moving fees required to move, or storage rentals and hotel fees if they can't find a place, and many of them don't. You might argue that they can move into the apartments of others who are being displaced. Those apartments will need to be cleaned or spruced up before the next tenant, so there will be a lag time of weeks or longer when these apartments are off the market. Where will the displaced tenants go? Some will stay with families, some will go to hotels, some will sleep in their cars, and some will leave the state. My second concern is the cost to society. Not having a place to live is extremely stressful. It leads to mental health crises and substance abuse. It makes it harder to keep a job. Housing instability is particularly hard on children. Seeing homeless people in the street, watching homeless children struggle in school, finding elderly women sleeping in their cars impacts all of us. And while I don't think that any time is a good time to remove tenant protections, now is absolutely the worst time to do it. The organizations that provide services to people who have lost their homes are already overwhelmed. People living in temporary housing are there for years because there are no affordable apartments for them. Town welfare departments are placing people in motels for many months at a time at taxpayer expense. Shelters are bulging at the seams, and 10 cities are popping up in every corner of the state. Archbishop Desmond Tutu once said, "There comes a point where we need to stop just pulling people out of the river. We need to go upstream and find out why they're falling in." We know why they're falling in. There is not enough affordable housing to go around. Making it easier to evict people will only set off a chaotic flood of people struggling to find housing in a tight market, which will further burden towns and organizations. Efforts to build more units are underway, but they will take time to complete. In Manchester alone, we have several hundred units in the planning and early construction stages, but there is no way they will be ready to capture the people who will be put out of their homes if this bill becomes law. Finally, I would like to speak about the effect that passing this bill will have on the economy. Human beings, like all God's creatures, need three things to survive: food, water, and shelter. In order to function, people need a place to live. The business community has made it clear that New Hampshire's shortage of housing has made it difficult for them to find and maintain their workforce. The housing shortage and the worker shortage are tied together. When we displace people from their homes, they may only be able to find suitable housing a significant distance away from their jobs. Some will commute if they have a reliable car, others may just quit. Others will leave the state entirely, making our current labor shortage worse. I thank you for listening to my testimony, and I hope that you will consider the well-being of our state when you decide the fate of this bill. Thank you.
Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you, Representative.
Thank you.
The chair will recognize Matt Bacon.
Good morning, Madam Chairwoman. Good morning, committee. My name is Matt Bacon. I'm a real estate agent here in New Hampshire. I'm here as a member of the New Hampshire Association of Realtors. I'm a member of the Public Policy Committee there, as well as the Commercial Investment Board of Realtors Public Policy Committee. And I'm representing NHAR in support of House Bill 117. In all of the contracts I work with as a commercial realtor, the end of the agreement is just that. It's the end of the agreement. The one exception in my knowledge in this state is a residential lease. In that situation, the written agreement specifying the end date of a lease is essentially meaningless based on several concerning factors, as stated by Representative Lynn, the sponsor. During an eviction, the end of the lease term is not considered a good cause to justify that eviction as previously stated. While RSA 542 certainly grants the property owner a variety of good cause rationales, such as failure to pay rent or the behavior of the tenant, which adversely affect the health and safety of other tenants. However, as a property owner, the onus is placed on me to prove my case. When I signed the lease with my tenant, we came to a mutual understanding about how long that lease term was going to be. It simply doesn't seem fair and reasonable that that singular portion of the contract is not enforceable and unilaterally to the benefit of the tenant. I've been advised by several attorneys that it's highly unlikely to recover the cost of evicting a tenant, even for blatant good cause. Proving a good cause takes time and money, and I can either try to recoup that lost revenue from rents of other tenants, or I simply have to take it as a loss. That raises the rent for other tenants and the risk associated with renting those units to new tenants. The argument against this bill is that with vacancy rates around New Hampshire so low, tenants will simply not have options to find housing. Realtors understand that argument probably better than most people do because we spend most of our days trying to find other people housing. However, this is a supply problem, not a landlord problem as it relates to that. Realtors want to see more housing, apartments, condos, single-family units across the state. Personally, I've sat in front of several bodies testifying that we need to expand access to housing by providing more housing options where infrastructure supports it, and opposing exclusionary or restrictive zoning. As an association, we believe that market forces will meet the demand if we allow it to, and that no one should be denied an opportunity to find safe and affordable housing. Instead, too often decisions made by our local governments make housing options limited in many communities. We should not take it out on property owners to bear the burden of going beyond the contractual scope in the mutual agreement that they make with their tenants in managing their properties. Costs are best balanced by the free market, but when we artificially design constraints that are placed on our rights as property owners, our costs go higher as a result of the judicial or legislative influence, and those costs ultimately are passed along to the tenants, either as a result of higher rents or less supply due to the ability to support additional development. A basic economic class will illustrate clear evidence that more supply drives down costs. An advanced one will clearly illustrate that ultimately the increased cost of litigation and artificial controls or one-sided interpretation will drive up costs to the end user, simply passing more of the burden on to our courts, landlords, and later to the public we all want to serve. We believe this legislation will help keep contracts to their scope and reduce unnecessary litigation costs in a way that not only serves public interest, but also maintains the integrity of an agreement for a term established at the time of signing. Thank you for your time, and please support House Bill 117.
Thank you, Matt. Any questions? Senator Shanley?
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Bacon. Can you walk me through something? We heard from when the bill was introduced that at least the suggestion that with the law as it stands now, a landlord could get stuck with a bad tenant. Can a tenant, is it not possible for a landlord to end the lease if there is in fact some violation of the terms of the lease?
So this is a term of the lease. So when the conclusion of a lease is reached, that is a material term of the lease. It's very easy to prove. It's in black and white, and it's agreed to up front. So as a term of the contract, it should be equally enforceable to all of their terms. I think your question, though, is related to if they're a bad tenant. Well, what comes down to that interpretation, then proving it? It may take substantial costs of getting third-party inspectors in to review the unit, or it may cost substantial amounts of surveillance and monitoring costs, internet costs to put up cameras in the hallways, which then result in privacy complaints from the tenants that then you have to defend yourself if they're in common areas only. There are a lot of other elements that can be relatively problematic and costly to prove. While it's very simple that if the term has expired, one of the contractual terms has been met, and I don't see why that shouldn't be good cause.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The chair will recognize Elliot Berry.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Elliot Berry. I speak in opposition to this bill. I should say that I speak solely as a private citizen. I had the good sense to retire a few months ago and the bad sense to come back. But I feel compelled to do so. And I think I can help provide some context to the committee because I'm such an old guy. Back in 1985, this legislature passed a bill requiring that all landlords, except for owner-occupied units and single-family homeowners, except for them, all landlords must have good cause for eviction. The statute lays out most any ground you could think of: non-payment, damage, behavior which threatens the health and safety of other tenants, the works. But then it also adds one other thing. It says other good cause. Other good cause means any legitimate or business interest in the landlord. So if the landlord wants to raise the rent and the tenant won't agree, that's other good cause for eviction explicitly in the statute. If a landlord wants to rehab or renovate the unit, that's other good cause. If there is something the parties didn't discuss, but the landlord finds it extremely problematic, the landlord can issue a 30-day notice that says, I will now regard this as, if it continues, as grounds for eviction. So what happened in the Jevich case, which I also argued before the state Supreme Court, did the court, by a 4-to-1 decision, suddenly become socialist? No. What the court said is they interpreted the statute that this legislature passed, which required all landlords, except for those few exceptions, all landlords, including those who don't have leases, to prove good cause for eviction. And I might add that that bill was signed by Governor Sununu I, who again is not a raging socialist as far as I know. The decision in the Aimco property versus Jevich came back before the Supreme Court in a case called Berkovich versus Jabakowski in a court order dated 2015. A unanimous decision upheld that interpretation of the statute. And do you know who was one of the 4 concurring members of the court? It was Judge Lynn. So what this is really about, what the statute is about, is that landlords don't like to go through a normal process to evict somebody. I should also add for comparison that in manufactured housing parks in the state of New Hampshire, a tenant can only be evicted for good cause, and the park owner does not have the right to evict for legitimate business and economic reasons. It's all based on tenant fault. That industry is thriving. The landlords are doing very, very well. What HB 117 does is it effectively repeals our good cause eviction statute, which has been in effect for 38 years. And how does it repeal it? Because why would any landlord not put in a lease, even those who don't require leases now, a 6-month lease, so you get a chance to evict a tenant if you find them undesirable for any reason, without having to prove any reason. And at the end of that 6-month period, if you're not satisfied with them, you kick them out. As Representative Staub already indicated, and I have this here for the committee, and I didn't make copies, and I'm sorry. Our 2022 residential rental survey costs done by New Hampshire Housing Finance Authority every year has the vacancy rate for a two-bedroom apartment at 0.3%. The median rent at $15.84, and I can tell you in the last 6 months of my tenancy, it went up a lot larger than that. There is a doctrine, Representative Lynn talked a lot about the sanctity of contracts and the reasonableness of contract. There's a doctrine in contract law called or the adhesion contract. An adhesion contract is when you get a seller of any good offers a take it or leave it deal to a party who has very, very little bargaining power. And that's what the essence of the deal now. The market forces, since 1985, which is why they passed the good cause eviction statute in the first place, the market conditions are such that the tenants have no bargaining power. You've been out there looking for 6 months for an apartment, and you finally find one you can afford, and the landlord says, sign this 6-month lease. And what are you going to do? Of course you're going to accept it. It's a little like when you go on the internet and you want to buy something really badly, maybe plane ticket, whatever it is, and you go on there, and there's 74 pages, if the equivalent of 74 pages of disclaimers. You don't even read them. You just say, I accept it because I need the product. There's no product more important than having a stable home. Is the shortage caused by this? By the good cause eviction statute, the shortage of affordable housing, especially for low-income people, is rampant across the country in places where they have absolutely no good cause eviction, whether it's Nashville or Houston or Salt Lake City, very conservative places. And now they're all having the same problem, and we had the same problem before we passed the good cause eviction statute. Somebody will suggest that landlords don't evict for no reason, but sometimes they do evict for trivial reasons. A child cries at night and the landlord, a tenant complains. An elderly tenant calls the landlord too much to complain about something. Another tenant doesn't like the tenant who's being evicted. And occasionally landlords evict for malicious reasons. A mentally ill patient acts strange. They can't make that eviction stick right now for acting strange, but if all you have to do is give a 30-day notice with no reason whatsoever, that person who acts strange is going to get evicted. Is it illegal to evict a mentally ill person under the Fair Housing Act just because they act strange? Yes, it is. Enforcement of that is ridiculously difficult, and especially for somebody from
Mr. Barry?
Yes.
I'm sorry, but we have so many speakers that I've asked that people try to keep it to 3 minutes. Do you think you could wrap it up?
Yeah, let me just add one more thing. And I'm sorry for taking so much time, but I've been invested in this for a very long time. Landlords constantly complain that it is too hard to evict somebody, too hard to make somebody lose their home for good cause. From 2014 to 2019, there were an average of 4,800 evictions a year. That's writs of possession, not cases filed, 4,800 a year. Today, in the first 2 months of February, there were 492 evictions, which at the same pace would mean almost 6,000 people will be evicted. How difficult is that? And the question is, should a tenant have to face the loss of a home and everything that comes with that without good cause? And I think the answer is fairly clear, that market forces shouldn't trump a family's security.
Thank you, Mr. Barry.
Thank you. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Seeing none, thank you. The chair will recognize Tom DeRosa. And I'm going to ask that you could just keep track of the time, please. Thank you, and that would be helpful.
Good morning again, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I'm Tom Rose with Housing Action New Hampshire. handed out a letter from Melissa Margolin, our Director of Housing Action, why we are in opposition to HB 117, and I will be very brief in the interest of time. As stated earlier, we are a statewide organization or coalition of 80 organizations united around affordable housing policy and ending homelessness in New Hampshire. And I would just like to call attention to our work with landlords and others throughout the pandemic in stabilizing their business and helping with the emergency rental assistance and rental deposit programs. And everybody came together quickly. We applaud everybody on their work there. And as these programs wind down and the federal resources wind down, we would just urge policymakers to remember that public policy plays a role in the market, and the consumer is squeezed right now. There's no rental resources, no rental housing available near job centers. There's policies here that are being considered that could facilitate evictions. We believe would undoubtedly challenge New Hampshire's economy and increase homelessness. I'll leave it to the rest. Much of what is in Alyssa's letter has been stated already by members previously, so I'll leave it for you all to read, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you.
Seeing none, thank you very much. The chair will now recognize Jessica Margison. Oh, good. You know why? You printed it so nicely.
Oh,
My
thank you.
problem is the printing sometimes.
Thank you. Again, I'm sorry for this. My name is Jessica Margison. I'm a tenant organizer with GSOP. And I also run the Granite State Tenants Association and our weekly tenant clinics. Our tenant clinic was started in 2021 as the eviction clinic in response to the overwhelming number of renovation evictions our state was experiencing. I did not help those just in Manchester. I have received calls from Sandown, Salem, Laconia, Concord, Nashua, Tilton, just to name a few. Our landlords have exercised their balance of power, and as we have seen, there is not a fight that will stop a renovation eviction. What we do have as tenants is just cause. Tenants will tell you there is a power imbalance that already exists as they walk into the court. Taking this protection away will only further tilt this injustice and allow those landlords who don't have their tenants' best interest in mind to do as they wish. Should it not be expected that someone who would want to live in an area more than 1 year before moving on to another area or city? Moving does not just encompass an address change. It can mean a job change, a school change, a new doctor, loss or change of community resources, and a disruption to transportation. Why this bill scares me and many of my renters across the state. What I hear, my landlord will just evict me if I complain about a repair I need. I recently spoke about a tenant from the clinic that was homeless for 9 months following a renovation eviction. She did get that apartment we spoke of that she was hoping for. We knew the apartment was a little rough around the edges, but thought it's a start. And after a couple years, hopefully more apartments will be available to move to. We lined up resources and movers were hired. Moving day came. The stove and fridge had to be moved to give the movers more room to get furniture through the door. The floor underneath was completely covered in dead cockroaches. We froze. She knew what this meant for her. We then went to open a window to get fresh air for the movers and discovered that there was not one single screen in any window in her 2-bedroom apartment. We froze again. She now understands what she is going to have to live through just to be housed. So when you consider this, just consider, as Elliot Berry spoke before me, about the good cause evictions that already exist. A landlord does not have any benchmarks to hit when it comes to a renovation eviction under good cause. They just need to say it, that they want it. It is subjective like art is. We have no benchmarks to hit, no qualifications to get a renovation eviction. It just goes through. Why give them more power and more ways to do that and not give a tenant a right to be able to stand up? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you, Jessica. The chair will now recognize Kirsten Cornell. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for taking my testimony. My name is Kirsten Cornell. I'm an attorney with New Hampshire Legal Assistance, and I'm here today to state our opposition to this bill. Even if you disagree with all of the principles that have been made up until now about good cause, about contract law, this is not the time to pass this law. This law was raised, a bill to this effect was raised last year as well as 10 years ago, and it was not passed either time, and nothing has changed in those 10 years that would make it more feasible now. As you've heard, New Hampshire is facing an acute housing crisis. It is incredibly difficult for tenants to find anywhere to go. Landlords say that it is hard to evict somebody to prove cause. Right now, it is impossible for a tenant to find somewhere to live on 30 days' notice. I'm going to try to keep this brief because you've heard many of these points before. But this law would result in many more evictions. This would result in local welfare systems having to help those families who are displaced until they're able to find another place to go. This is cost that is on the municipalities and is passed on to the taxpayers. Already tight budgets are already being pushed to the breaking point, and this will just take it further. Without housing, everything in a person's life falls apart. Their children aren't able to stay in the same schools. They struggle to keep the same job. This will make it more difficult for kids in the state of New Hampshire to develop healthily, to engage in their education, and it will make it more difficult for employees to stay at their current job during a time when it seems like everyone is hiring, and we hear frequently that there's just not enough people to work. We have an issue of supply in the state. There's no denying that. The reason for that is not because landlords don't want to get into the market. It has been the result of exclusionary zoning practices that NHLA has been at the forefront of trying to solve. At this time, there are many landlords, property developers lining up to create additional property, but that takes time. And that's not going to happen within the next year. So, as I said, now is not the time. We simply don't have anywhere for people to go. The homelessness crisis is incredibly acute. As part of my job, I go to a case review every week in which we see at least 20 cases of people being evicted each week. NHLA runs an eviction clinic, and each week in both Manchester and Nashua, we see multiple people being evicted, and they don't have anywhere to go. So I encourage you to take into consideration the cultural moment that we're in right now, even if you disagree with the principles that others have stated thus far.
Thank you very much. Questions? Seeing none, thank you. The chair will recognize Freeman Toth.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Freeman Toth, and I work for the Belknap Merrimack Community Action Program. I run the street outreach division from essentially North Manchester to Meredith. We work with folks that are unsheltered. They live outside, cars, vehicles, tents. These are our friends, brothers, sisters, mothers, and fathers. This does not discourage landlords from offering units unequivocally. It encourages rent evictions and large rent hikes. Having been the auxiliary supervisor for the Emergency Rental Assistance Program for this catchment, I can tell you this is fact. We experienced large rent hikes because landlords knew we had to pay. During the pandemic, we saw proof of this over and over again. We have approximately 212 people that will be hitting the streets on April 1st, which is a Saturday, exiting hotels due to the funding ending. This will further exacerbate that. These two issues intersect and will compound one another. This does not stop evictions or lease terminations. This just requires just cause. I do have to agree with many of the folks before me that there are plenty of ways, and this is my bread and butter, we see it day in and day out, for a person to be evicted. It is not hard, despite what has been said today, to evict a person. This is our everyday at CAP. Just cause gives people their day in court, and it's important that people have the option to be heard, especially people who are poor. It is not possible to find housing within 30 days right now. The argument that is being made that allowing landlords to evict people easier will improve the flow of housing stock is absurd. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Oh, thank you. Questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. The chair will recognize Ellen. Good morning, Ellen.
My name is Ellen Grow, and until last December, I was the executive director of the Concord Coalition to End Homelessness, and then I retired. So I'm speaking today solely as an individual in opposition to this bill. And people before me have spoken so eloquently, so I will try to keep this very short. But I am certain that passing this law will add to the homeless crisis in our state. Many people before me have noted the extreme housing shortage that we're facing. Passing this legislation will allow landlords to send their tenants out into this impossible housing market for arbitrary reasons, or as noted before, even hidden discriminatory reasons. And for tenants who are living on the edge financially, this could easily push them over the edge into homelessness. And housing is not like other commodities. A lease does need more protection than other contracts. Housing is the foundation for everything else in someone's life. The stability to keep your job, to keep your kids in their school and doing well, for your mental health, your physical health. It's the foundation for everything. And when a person becomes homeless, it starts a spiral of negative impacts, and it's extremely hard to climb back out of that. And even if displaced tenants are able to find another home and avoid homelessness, this major disruption in their life can trigger some of the same negative effects of instability. So for the sake of the individuals and families who rent their homes in this state, which also affects the stability of our entire community, I urge you to oppose this bill. Thank you. Any questions?
Seeing none, thank you very much. The chair will now recognize David Klein.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and other members of the committee for allowing me to speak. My name is David Klein. I am a small landlord. I'm here representing myself. I am also a retired attorney. From the point of view of a landlord, we don't want to evict if we don't have to. Evictions are expensive. We have court fees we have to pay. If an outside attorney is hired, that's expensive. We lose rent during the eviction process because tenants tend to stop paying rents. There's potential damage. These people are being evicted. Some of the people don't care about the property and will continue to damage it. And then we have serious turnover costs. We have to go back in and clean it. We have to repair it, repaint it in many instances. And as a result, landlords do not, in general, evict for no reason. Evictions are also a civil proceeding in the court system of New Hampshire. The burden of proof, as with most civil proceedings, falls on the plaintiff, which would be the landlord seeking the eviction. It means that as a landlord, I have to prove by the preponderance of the evidence that I have met my burden to show those causes. There are situations where to make that proof is very, very difficult. A very common example is when people bring in an illegal roommate. You can't be there 24/7 watching the doors and who goes and comes. Putting up cameras, they fail, they're expensive, internet connections. So as a result, we have situations, and I had a real one, which I'll skip due to time concerns, honoring the chair's request on that, that it's very hard to get prove these activities, and you come to the end of the lease, and we can't evict based on the lease is over. We have to find a cause. As a result, this gives us that weapon, and understand that these people who violate these terms of the lease that we can't prove affect other people in the building. They run up our costs, heat, hot water, water usage, meaning rent increases go across the board. If they're noisy, they affect everybody else in the building, but nobody wants to come testify. So it's an advantage to the other tenants too that we have this available. Now, you've heard some talk about rent increases and so forth. Those are fully allowed under today's law. This bill does not affect a restriction on rent increases, does not affect restrictions on landlords evicting for renovations, so it has no set effect on that. If we're in a position where you don't pass the bill and we have to start putting in cause, as Representative Lynn said, now you have an eviction based on bad behavior, and that can be found out by a subsequent landlord or someone that they're applying to. And that's the type of person I will not go near. If some of the landlord evicted for cause, especially bad behavior, I'm not going to rent to them, period. As far as increasing the number of evictions, what Elliot Barry didn't tell you is the majority of evictions are for non-payment. This will not have a major effect on the number of evictions. It's going to be a small amount of people whose behavior are bad, but we can't totally prove it. And it gives us a little bit of another weapon. It gives us the ability to help the existing tenants, because all of these buildings are multifamily. Is restricted property, generally 4 units or more, definitely not owner occupied. And when you have that many people congested, you have to think about there's noise, other problems, and these tenants deserve to be protected too, the people who stay. And I have many long-term tenants. I was thinking that my longest term tenant now is over 22 years. And we're not out to put him out. He's very good. And it's only these tenants, though, that very small group of bad tenants that this bill will affect. And therefore, we're asking you to just give us that ability to get rid of this person who hurts everybody and everybody else in the building without having to go through proof problems that are very difficult at times. Thank you for your attention, and I'm open to any questions.
Thank you very much. Questions? Seeing none, thank you. The chair will call Jane.
Good morning.
Good morning, Jane.
My name's Jane Hake. I live in Manchester. I'm a member of the Manchester Housing Alliance. And I feel extremely fortunate that my husband and I are able to own our own house. And we don't have a landlord trying to weaponize our behavior or whatever he perceives as behavior as an excuse to possibly evict us. I can't imagine the stress, the mental health stress about living in a situation where you felt like you were being judged all the time and the landlord could evict you without just cause. Like, you know, it's November and you know your lease is coming up in December and you're like, you know, did we say something wrong? Did we do something wrong? You might have kids in school. The stress would kill me. I could tell you that much. It would be the end of me. But I think this bill is really about putting property rights about the rights of people to their place to live. Everybody agrees, I think, that our housing market is in crisis. We have many housing units under construction, fortunately, but it's going to be a couple of years, I think. We follow this very, very closely through the planning department and approvals and so forth in Manchester, not in the rest of the state. But I hope the situation will improve, but this is a particularly bad time to pass a bill that might possibly put people at the risk of eviction when there's so many people, as you've heard from others, who are about to lose their housing in hotels that they've been staying in because they can't find a place to live. And this is a really, really, really bad time to pass this. Not that it's a great idea in the first place. You know, we have some of the landlords here trying to say that somehow this is going to be a benefit to disagreeable tenants who at least get a chance to get on the ladder, you know, and that somehow if you pass this, then the free market, somebody's going to build more apartments. Well, if you think that this is going to solve the problem of the free market, is going to somehow unleash itself and build more apartments, I mean, I got a bridge to sell you. This is not going to happen. We've had a housing crisis that's only gotten worse over the last 10 years. The free market is not going to solve the housing crisis problem. We need to think of other solutions. But in the meantime, I think we need to protect tenants' rights and not jump on this bandwagon getting rid of just cause eviction at this particularly horrible time. Thank you. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Any questions? Okay, thank you. The chair will call Brandon May.
Good morning. My name is Brandon LeMay. I'm from Manchester, and I'm a tenant organizer with Rights and Democracy in the Manchester Housing Alliance. And I'm here today to speak in strong opposition to House Bill 117. Now, we've heard some esoteric arguments on contract law, but I am here today to tell you what this bill would do to living, breathing human beings. And what that would do is increase the amount of those human beings going through the eviction process. HB 117 seeks to abolish good cause eviction. It's one of the few rights that tenants have to match the bargaining power of landlords in a tight rental market. The bill is a direct threat to the well-being of some of our most vulnerable community members, those on low or fixed incomes, particularly the elderly and the disabled. As a community organizer, I have seen firsthand the devastating effects of that eviction can have on families and individuals. I do volunteer outreach on a regular basis at the park in Manchester, Veterans Park. And as reported in WMUR is what I've seen with my own two eyes, is that increasingly the homeless population is more and more consisting of elderly, disabled people who simply cannot keep up with the rising rents and other costs of living. This bill will only exacerbate that problem by making it easier for landlords to evict tenants without a valid reason. In my opinion, this bill is throwing gasoline on a fire, and that fire is this housing crisis right now. We need more supply. We don't need to be restricting rights of tenants when they're already facing a lot of hardship. If 117 were to pass, the consequences would be dire. More evictions would inevitably lead to the increase in homelessness, which would overwhelm our already burdened homeless shelters and transitional housing programs. This would not only put an enormous strain on our social safety net, but it would also just lead to the increased suffering and hardship for everybody affected. And if we're going to talk about private property rights, what about the property owners who are going to have more homelessness in their cities and their communities? I mean, that's unfair to them as well, too, in my opinion. But I'm going to be short here. I urge you, I beg of you to please reject House Bill 117 and supports policies that actually add supply to the housing crisis instead. This bill does not add supply. It does not help communities struggling with unseen numbers of homelessness, and it will just result in more evictions in general. So I'll be really short today, and I'll take any questions if you have any.
Any questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
The chair will recognize Mary Osborne.
Hi. I am here to speak in opposition of this bill. Hello, my name is Mary Osborne, and I am a resident of Dover, as well as a voucher holder. This November, I am anticipating receiving a letter from my property manager with a new lease, which may come with a higher rent, but at least I won't have to worry about finding a new home. However, if HB 117 is passed, it would add an additional concern for me when my lease ends. I am a responsible tenant who pays my rent on time and respects the property that I live in. My profession as a mental health peer support provider has allowed me to help others who are facing mental health issues. And unfortunately, 90% of the families I work with also face housing insecurity. If I were to be evicted at the end of this lease, it would take at least 6 months, if not longer, to find a new place to live. I literally hit the lottery when I found this place. It took a long time to find our current home, and the last move was especially difficult for my son, Aiden, who has special needs and is autistic. Transitions are challenging for any child, but for an autistic youth who struggles to fit in and form relationships, the impact can be even more profound. Stability is critical for children's success, and I do not want to put Aiden through the stress of moving again. Since becoming a resident of Dover, I have become an active member of the community and advocate for those who face challenges such as housing insecurity, mental health issues, and disabilities like myself and my son. A stable home allows mothers like myself to contribute to building a thriving community. In my view, HB 117 takes away protections that are essential for people who are caregivers, advocates, mental health workers, and other essential workers. I am asking you to please urgently oppose this bill. Thank you.
Any questions? I do want to ask one question.
Yes, ma'am.
Mary, thank you for your testimony. You sound like a model tenant. You said you know, very happy there. You pay your rent on time. So I guess I'm just want to know what would make you think that you would get evicted if you're a model tenant?
I have seen circumstances where, you know, maybe they decide that they don't want to rent to a voucher holder anymore. Maybe they don't want to go through the inspection process or all of the ins and outs of it. You know, there are many reasons. Maybe they just want to remodel the place, right? There's a whole lot of that going on just recently within the last few years. I have friends who have, you know, been voucher holders and have been told, well, it's okay, move out. We're just going to renovate it a little bit and you can move right back in. And the rent's raised above the threshold level. They were unable to move back in. So it's just, I know that as a model tenant, they might have to spend a little bit of time. I have a whole army I could pull in to fight for me and try, but I know from hearing from others' experience that it doesn't seem to take very much to just kick a person out if you need to. So that's just, yeah.
Thank you for answering the question.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. The chair will now recognize Nick Norman. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman, for the time to speak. I do have some written testimony that should be passed around. My name is, for the record, Nick Norman. I'm the Government Affairs Chair for the Apartment Association and work with the landlord associations across the state. We follow landlord-tenant law as it goes through the legislative cycle and give out weekly updates to somewhere in the range of about 3,500 property owners, landlords across the state of New Hampshire. And myself personally, I have about 35 or more years as a landlord. There's just some basic points here. I don't think that I'll be very long because it's really pretty well all been said. A contract ought to be a contract. I mean, that's just basic sense, right? You enter a contract, you have a beginning, you have an end. But it's very imbalanced in the landlord-tenant law world. So just like Representative Lynn, former Supreme Court Justice, said, for the landlord, it's essentially a contract forever, but the tenant has the ability to end the contract at the end of the lease. And I can tell you, unquestionably, myself and any other landlord I know does not want to evict. It makes no business sense to evict somebody. Right? You come up with a huge amount of cost. The court cost and so forth is actually quite minimal compared to everything else that is entailed when you evict someone. There's lost rents, there's extra renovation, turnover costs are really quite expensive. The labor costs for maintenance these days to do all that work is extremely high. It's always a loss of money when you evict somebody. And we don't want to evict anyone anyway. It's devastating to them personally. The only time that we would, and I can tell you myself and any landlord I speak to would evict someone is because there's something going on that makes them a bad tenant in many ways. Maybe they're not paying rent. We can evict for that easily. That this bill doesn't affect that. But there's many other reasons why a tenant would be evicted. And all of those reasons have to be proven. It can be very, very difficult. And I've had many real estate attorneys throughout the state that essentially say it's virtually impossible to evict for some of the other good causes. So we just feel like it should be the end of a lease should be an end of a lease. And I can tell you there's no reason a landlord would want to be arbitrarily evicting someone as bad business all around. There's a few things that's been talked about and said that make no sense to me at all. This bill does nothing to increase the amount of housing. It does nothing to reduce the amount of housing. Yes, we have a housing urgency in the state. We need more housing. This bill doesn't touch that at all. It doesn't increase homelessness. How could that be possible? If someone is evicted, that means a unit is available. Doesn't that mean one person goes out, one person comes in? So I don't see how it could possibly increase homelessness. You're making some units available, you're making some tenants displaced. It doesn't have anything to do with rent increases. A landlord can already raise the rent to whatever they want. It doesn't have anything to do with Section 8. A landlord doesn't have to accept Section 8 already. It's just providing a means of saying at the end of a lease, if the landlord doesn't want to renew, then they don't have to. I'd be very, very happy to take questions, and I'm quite knowledgeable about real estate, so if you want to contact me afterwards, always feel free to call me at any time. My contact info is on that handout I gave.
Other questions from the committee? Thank you very much
Thank
for your
you.
testimony. The chair will now recognize Katie Masters. Good afternoon, Katie.
All right. Good morning, almost good afternoon. My name is Katie Masters and I'm a resident of Littleton. I am here today to testify in opposition of HB 117. I could spend the next few minutes rattling off the facts and figures about the housing crisis that we're facing here in New Hampshire, but I'm sure all of you are well aware of those numbers, and it would just be a poor use of my time. Granite Staters, especially Granite Staters who do not own property, are in desperate need of help at the state level in order to make our lives safer. Housing is one of the biggest issues in the state that complicates the lives of under 40s who are struggling to make ends meet. As we collectively continue to ignore those needs, Granite Staters are leaving their homes in droves for other regions of the country that offer better pay and secure housing for its residents. Why are we trying to take away rights when the figures tell us squarely that more help is needed? This bill is a clear attack on the livelihoods of those who could already be facing insecurities in other ways. There's a huge banner down the block speaking to the need of housing for the most vulnerable of our population, and we're sitting here during working hours debating taking away one of the only safeguards for tenants in this state that could separate the housed from the unhoused. As a tenant myself, this terrifies me. Why are we trying to treat our renting residents as second-class citizens? Finding housing at all is such a tall order right now. And as a hospitality worker in the White Mountains region, I know one of our biggest obstacles as the region continues to grow is finding staff at all levels. As a member of the incoming generation of business leaders, I fear we are putting too much of a burden on this generation, not only from my perspective as a tenant, but from my perspective as a person in management from a small business here in the state. We are creating unnecessary hurdles that have more widespread implications on our economy, and that will only grow over time. I urge you to oppose this bill, which costs taxpayers nothing and helps keep working Granite Staters safer. Thank you.
Any questions? Thank you very much. So the chair will recognize Hayden Smith.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Almost afternoon. My name is Hayden Smith, and I'm a legislative organizer with New Hampshire Youth Movement, representing them to testify in opposition to HB 117. And by the way, I'm from Hanover as well. This bill does stand to worsen the impacts of what is already a straining housing crisis on New Hampshire's working and young renters. Many other people have already spoken to a lot of the other points that I'd like to uplift. So I'll try to keep it brief. As I'm sure you're all aware, renters in New Hampshire are facing record low rental availability, with statewide vacancy rate hovering around 0.5% as of 2022. Especially if one can't afford to buy their own home, apartment hunting is quite difficult. Speaking as a young person who was born and raised in New Hampshire, the lack of housing options acutely affects working young people like me who want to stay in the state they've called home, but can't find any independent housing options, much less affordable ones. I'm perhaps somewhat embarrassed to admit that I'm still living with my parents at age 22. With this context, the harmful consequences of an eviction at this time in New Hampshire become clear. If you are evicted, there are extremely few housing alternatives, and you are at greater risk of homelessness. And while I am lucky that my parents are still willing to put up with me and keep a roof over my head while I'm working, a lot of other people don't have that option, and I don't want someone to have to end up on the street over an eviction given without cause. In the midst of this crisis, we're alarmed that the General Court is considering HB 117, a bill that would effectively eliminate the good cause protections by allowing landlords to evict without having to provide a just cause when that lease ends, even if the tenant fully respected the terms of the lease. The current good cause policy helps prevent unjustified evictions and protects against retaliation. As such, I think we need to uphold good cause, not get rid of it. By lowering the bar for eviction, the bill would increase housing insecurity for New Hampshire renters and could leave many lease-abiding tenants without a roof over their heads. I would also add that landlords already have the grounds to evict tenants who violate their lease, as many other people have mentioned. So any legal changes made by HB 117 would fall squarely on well-behaved renters who have adhered to the terms of their lease. In advising against this bill, I don't seek to make negative assumptions about New Hampshire's landlords. I do, however, want to stop this bill because it doesn't make it easier to be a housing provider, but it makes it so much easier to be a housing denier. In light of all of this, I urge the committee to report HB 117 as inexpedient to legislate, or to at least retain the bill in order to better assess its adverse effect on renters. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Does anyone else from the public want to speak to HB 117?
Good morning. Thank you for hearing my testimony. My name is Vanessa Blaze. I serve as the Director of Policy and Planning for the New Hampshire Council on Developmental Disabilities. I'm going to be as brief as possible today. We're very concerned with the reversal of this Supreme Court decision, thereby removing this protection for tenants, which could create a substantial hardship for renters with disabilities who are already at a severe disadvantage in finding safe, stable, and affordable housing in their communities. It's a concern that landlords will use this to easily disguise discrimination by being able to evict tenants to avoid requests for reasonable accommodations, or tenants who become disabled during their tenancy, or who are often merely considered to be an inconvenience. This Supreme Court decision specifically highlights the need to protect tenants with disabilities, and it's our belief that these tenants need protection now more than ever. So again, we would like to see this law remain in place to increase opportunities for renters with disabilities who have benefits to remaining in their homes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. Is there anyone else from the public? Come right up.
Thank you. My name is Lindsay Lincoln. I'm an attorney with New Hampshire Legal Assistance, and I just wanted to echo those who are in opposition to the bill and just note a couple of things, follow up from some of the earlier testimony. One, I would certainly agree that this bill would allow evictions to cover discriminatory motivated reasons, which is incredibly difficult to prove that a landlord is engaging in discriminatory actions when the landlord only has to show that the lease has concluded. Another thing I would note is that on Landlord Connection, or a site where landlords would check to see sort of the viability of a tenant, how good are they, have they been evicted before, that resource does not indicate the reason for eviction. So simply saying, oh, well, it's a tenant protective measure to have their lease ending as the justification for their eviction instead of maybe they're having unlawful guests. That is not reflected in what subsequent landlords would see. So that is not a protection that tenants would be entitled to. And also, importantly, in the testimony you've heard, it's a matter of not wanting to have to prove that a tenant has done something wrong. That's the real, oh, let's just say the lease term has ended. We don't have to give a reason. It's easy. They're in and out. And that's, of course, problematic when you're talking about the roof over someone's head and saying, oh, yeah, well, they're not deserving of their day in court, deserving of proof that they've actually done something wrong to justify them losing their home. And that's all I have to say.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who would like to speak on House Bill 117? Seeing none, that will conclude the hearing for today. Have a good rest of your day. Thank you.